Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, 3 reasons why the Karl-Anthony Towns trade will be a good thing for Minnesota. I'll give you 3 reasons why Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo will help the Timberwolves this season. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic start to your week. Media Day was yesterday. Not a whole lot to kind of take from that because, of course, the Cat trade is not final. So there was some dancing around Julius Randle Cat-related topics, but, a couple high points there, I guess. And I want to really focus today on the positives of the Julius Randle trade, the Julius Randle / Donte DiVincenzo trade. And I gave a lot of thoughts on Saturday's bonus show, on Monday's show. So I'll kind of quickly summarize that because I have an overall take on this, but I'm going to take the positive view today, the glass half full look at this deal, and tell you why this trade will be a positive. The three reasons why it will be a positive thing for Minnesota. So we'll do all that here today. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, we are daily now, Monday through Friday, all the time. Now through next July, we're daily. So make sure that you are following and subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. So my overall take on this trade, go back and listen to the bonus show Saturday, a little bit of a shorter one. Crossover episode on Monday with Alex Wolf of Locked On Knicks, a little bit of a longer episode. Today will be our normal length episode. But the high points here are, in short, I don't think this trade makes the Timberwolves better this season. I think there are areas that it makes them better in, and we'll get into a lot of that here today. I think that it does give the Wolves a little bit more flexibility in the next couple of years in terms of some different options. The Julius Randle player option. Do they extend Rudy and or Julius Randle? Do they, are they able to trade one of those guys? Probably not Rudy, but you never know. It certainly gives them some more flexibility to, say, extend Reid and play around with a little bit of space if Randle opts out and walks, or if they trade Randle at the deadline or whatever. There are some more scenarios for Minnesota, and I understand why the Cat trade was made now, and I talked a lot about that last few days. I don't know that it makes the Timberwolves, I'm pretty confident it makes their roster worse right now and their immediate outlook worse, but there are positives that I want to get into today. I'll dig into some of the concerns more specifically, like I talked generally about it on Saturday and a little bit on Monday's show. My immediate reaction show Saturday is where I really got into some of that, but I want to get more in the weeds on some of the concerns I have. Probably do that on tomorrow's show. Today, I want to focus on the positives. Okay, so that's where we're going to go with this. Let's start with the Julius Randle positive. I'm going to dig a bit more on the Donte DiVincenzo one because I haven't focused as much on that piece of the trade, and I do think he was the tipping point based on all the reporting we're hearing that the Knicks, including DiVincenzo, is what really kind of pushed this trade across the finish line. But I want to talk about the Julius Randle thing first because he is the player who is kind of, by default replacing Karl-Anthony Towns. He's the big replacing the big, right? So I'm going to focus on the positives here. All right. There are concerns. The concerns, whether it's, Randle operating in isolation, taking, being a bit of a ball stopper and not nearly as efficient as Karl-Anthony Towns or even as Anthony Edwards. These things are all true, but there are some things that Randle does really well. One is he puts great pressure on the rim. And one example of that is it's really easy to just look at free throw rate. Free throw rates for their career, Karl-Anthony Towns for his entire career has a .324 free throw rate, which again, the definition of that is number of free throw attempts per field goal attempt. Julius Randle's is .369, so basically .37. That's significantly better. If you want to look at it as Free throws attempted per 36 minutes, which is not, I don't love per 36, but I think for this, it gives some good context. Cat for his career averages 5.5 free throws per 36 minutes. Julius Randle, 6.1 free throws per 36 minutes. And that number's gone up quite a bit, basically since the Pelican season, which was a bit of a breakup for him in 18-19 when he played for Chris Finch, coordinated that offense of the 18-19 season. Since then, Julius Randle's averaged 6.5 free throws per game. Since that season for Cat, he's averaged just over 6 free throws per game. So roughly half a free throw more per game from Julius Randle. Or per 36. The free throw rate is a few tenths of a point higher. So free throw rate is number one. Along with that, attempts at the rim. Julius Randle last year attempted nearly 27% of his shots within 3 feet of the basket, according to Basketball Reference. Karl-Anthony Towns was about a percentage point lower. If you take his career, Cat at the rim or within 3 feet is under 32. He's 31.8%. Julius Randle's 1.5 points higher than that. Exactly a third of Julius Randle's career shot attempts have come within 3 feet of the basket. And Cat's has that number's gone down because he used to post up a lot, like low block, like Sam Mitchell, Tibbs, right? Like Sam Mitchell year, Tibbs. There was a year under Tibbs where Cat shot 38% of his shots from within 3 feet of the basket. Over the last, let's do this. The last 4 seasons, Karl-Anthony Towns has only attempted 28% of his shots within 3 feet of the basket. That number for Julius Randle is it's roughly the same. But it's gone up drastically in 2 of the last 3 seasons because of the straight line drives, because of the bully ball that Julius Randle plays, because of the fouls that he's drawing, because he's so much more physical, and also because he doesn't draw the number of offensive fouls that Karl-Anthony Towns does, the free throw rate is higher. And that's significant. The pressure that Julius Randle could put on the defense, and really along with that, punishing mismatches, which is something that I think it's a little bit, it's not niche because it does matter. It matters more in the playoffs. And we saw Karl-Anthony Towns not able to do that at times. I think it was the Celtics. Did the Celtics guard Cat with Drew Holiday? I'm pretty sure they did in at least one of those 2 games against both fantastic overtime games. And that worked fairly well. We've seen other teams guard Cat with smaller guys, and Cat doesn't punish those double teams, in part because of the offensive fouls, partly because he's afraid to commit offensive fouls, and because the Wolves struggled to get the ball to Cat in an advantageous spot, and Cat didn't, he didn't have it. He didn't want to dominate in that way necessarily, or at least it didn't come across that way. And it was always a little bit clunky trying to dominate mismatches. Julius Randle loves dominating mismatches. And if Ant has the ball in his hands, Randle's going to get some opportunities to punish mismatches. And that goes along with his overall toughness mentality. I talked about this a little bit, I think, on yesterday's show. I think that's going to really matter long-term from Julius Randle. Drawing fouls, being physical, being tough, straight line drives, being able to finish in a variety of ways. Again, not as efficient of a jump shooter. Like I'd rather have Cat shoot a mid-range jumper than Julius Randle, but Julius Randle's better at getting that shot off, almost a kind of that spin push shot that he gets off in the mid-range is a better shot for him than anything that Cat would have done without committing an offensive foul, right? Like that was always the fear there. So I think the pressure on the rim, the free throw rate, those things, and the punishing mismatches are going to be super important. And then I'll get into this a little bit more in the final segment today when I talk a bit about the team's depth, improved depth with after, post trade, is the way that the Wolves will be able to manage their bench unit, their reserve unit, how those minutes are staggered. Julius Randle could basically, even if he's a starter, which I think he will be, he could be kind of the de facto 6th man this year, where he may be on the bench with bench units, and he's the guy that the offense runs through. And Julius Randle can run an offense for stretches. He can be a guy that has the ball in his hands, and he's the guy that's the engine that's making the thing go. And a lot of it's isolation scoring, but he's also a pretty good passer for a big. And I'm not focusing as much on that on today's show, but we will as we move forward here. Julius Randle is a creator. Julius Randle operating in pick and roll, driving and kicking. His assist rate on drives is far greater than Cat's ever was. Like it's not close. I mean, Julius Randle is really good at passing out of drives. He's really good at dumping off to bigs. Like, the overall minutes, we'll talk about this later too. The minutes with Mitchell Robinson for Julius Randle last year were not as good as Cat Rudy minutes. They just weren't. But some of the stuff he could do, like if you watch back some of the possessions where Randle gets assists, whether it's dumping off to Jericho Sims or Mitchell Robinson, like these guys in the dunker, and Randle on a short roll makes better decisions and is a more accurate passer than Cat, that's going to matter too. And that comes with, hey, what if he operates that bench unit? What if he's dumping the ball off to, whatever big he's playing with? I guess usually going to be Rudy or Nas, for easy dunks that way. That's just another way he can create that Cat didn't necessarily create previously. And then the last thing that I want to touch on related to Randle is corner 3-point shooting. I don't want to oversell this because that's been streaky throughout his career. Like Randle, like you go through his career corner 3-point shooting percentage, it goes from, really when he started shooting volume from 34% to 39% to 41% to 29% to 33% to 53% last year. So it's been all over the map. For his career, he's only 37% from the corner. But last year, he shot about 15% of his threes from the corners, and he was 53% from there. That's the only place that he graded out positively in terms of 3-point shooting. You go over to B-ball index, and he was a C or worse everywhere. He was a 52 percentile C on catch and shoot 3-pointers overall, just over 35%. Of course, Cat's like 41%. But from the corners, he was 92nd percentile on relatively low volume. Again, only 15% of his threes came from the corners. Cat didn't love hanging in the corner. I don't know that Randle's going to love doing that either. But when he's on the floor with Ant, if that's like one of the options for Julius Randle is just go stand in the corner. We're going to kick you, Ant's going to kick you the ball. You're going to knock down an open corner 3. Great. And then when Ant's off the floor, the ball's in your hands and you're operating. I wanted the Wolves to do that with Cat more last year. And Cat like never was super psyched about hanging out in the corner, quite clearly. Either that or the coaching staff didn't really want to force the issue. But that's a really advantageous spot to put Julius Randle. And then if Ant's off the floor, let Randle go to work. And he, I think, will be better as an isolation scorer, as a face-up scorer, in part, not just as a scorer, but in part because he's a better creator than Karl-Anthony Towns. I think the offense could be better in Randle minutes with no Ant than it was in Cat minutes with no Ant last 2 years. And we'll get more into that here as we move forward toward the season. There's so much to unpack here. I want to talk about my next positive takeaway here, and this is going to be all about Donte DiVincenzo. And there's a couple things I want to hit on related to DDV. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page that you place your bets. Also related to basketball, I talked about this on yesterday's show. The Timberwolves did not move at all. FanDuel win total still 52.5 post-Cat trade. The Knicks actually went up a little bit. Even though they took a hit in their depth, they got the best player in the trade. That's reflected in the FanDuel win total line. So go check that out at FanDuel. If you're feeling like Knicks 54.5 is for you, feels a little high to me, although the East is not quite the monster that the West is. I thought it was interesting the Wolves didn't take a hit at all, but maintained the same, which I guess goes along with what I've been saying. Like, I think the roster overall got a little bit worse, but I don't necessarily think their floor got that much lower. Their ceiling got that much lower. I did that backwards with my hands if you're watching on YouTube. But I just think it's kind of compressed. Like, I think there's just less upside and there's maybe not a whole lot less downside. But they're going to be kind of around that same area. So 52.5 still is the win total over at FanDuel. Get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet over at FanDuel. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. Now for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk about Donte DiVincenzo. And there will be more on Randle, by the way. Today, I want to hit the 3 positives. I'll probably do a whole show. I mean, I will, because I'll do a preview on Randle. But I want to dive into each of those elements I just mentioned, and I want to talk about Randle-only minutes and what to expect from that. We'll get to that later. But I want to hit DiVincenzo now. I think he's the swing element here in this trade. And there's been reporting that like he wasn't on the table. And then as soon as he was, the Wolves said, all right, I think we can make this work. And a couple reasons for that. One, and I don't want to spend a ton of time talking contracts today, but the contract's awesome. Like it's under 11 million this year. It's a little over 11 next year. I think it's like 11 and a half the year after that. The cost certainty and getting one of the better role players in the league at a really what's turned into a bargain contract very quickly. It's a dude that averaged almost 16 a game last year for the Knicks as a most of the time starter for them. And this is a nugget. Alex Wolf mentioned this on Monday's show, but it absolutely floored me. I verified it. He's 100% right. Not that I didn't trust Alex, but I had to verify it before I repeated it on my own air here. Donte DiVincenzo was number 3 in the NBA in three-pointers attempted and number 3 in three-point makes last year, behind only Steph Curry and Luka Doncic. That's how good of a shooter Donte DiVincenzo was last season. He's been good basically his whole career, but especially the last 3 seasons, he's been awesome. I think he's going to swing this trade in part because of the contract and in part because of the shooting. And there's another element that I think has gone maybe a little bit under the radar. So we'll get back to the shooting here in a second. But in terms of his defense, he is a solid on-ball defender. But in Minnesota, he's not going to have to defend the caliber of player he did night in and night out with the Knicks. I know the Knicks, OG Anunoby, I know they've had guys that can defend. I get it. The Wolves have Jaden McDaniels. They have Anthony Edwards. They have Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Those are 3 of the very best on-ball defenders in the league. 2 of those 3 guys got votes for all defensive team. Jaden McDaniels was second team all defense. You also have Rudy Gobert. Like Mitchell Robinson's great. Gobert's played a lot more games than Mitchell Robinson. He's also better than Mitchell Robinson. So Donte DiVincenzo is actually a fantastic off-ball defender. And that's one of the areas that the Wolves were nitpicking because the Timberwolves were the best defense in the league by far last year, but they have guys that aren't always super locked in off the ball. Ant being one of them. I would argue that Cat occasionally was one of them. And Julius Randle, that's also something that could happen to Julius as well. We talked about this with Locked On Knicks on Monday. But DiVincenzo off the ball, he was 93rd percentile last year, according to Basketball Index, in terms of steals per 75 possessions as an off-ball defender. That's an A. 94th percentile in deflections per 75 possessions also grades out as an A on B-Ball Index. And his passing lane defense was 62nd percentile, which is a B-. The way that's calculated is it's bad pass steals plus deflection. So how active is he in the passing lanes? He was above average league-wide, 62nd percentile in terms of that. In New York, he guarded the top 2 usage tiers the vast majority of the time. In fact, he was 88th percentile league-wide in guarding the usage, the top usage tier, so really the stars, superstars, and 97th percentile guarding usage tier 2. He's not going to have to guard usage tier 1 ever because he's going to be on the floor. He's 6'3", 6'4". He's going to be on the floor with a bigger, more physical guard every time he steps on the floor. At least one of Jaden, Ant, and Nickeil, if not 2 of those 3. So what are they going to have Donte do? Well, Donte is going to play like obviously Mike Conley and Rob Dillingham. Very likely one of those 2 guys is going to be on the floor a lot of the time. But first of all, there's a fallback option now where your backcourt is Ant and Donte DiVincenzo. And Ant's your de facto point guard. DiVincenzo is your catch and shoot off guard. Ant takes the tougher defensive assignment, and DiVincenzo guards the next toughest, right? He won't ever have to guard the toughest defensive assignment on the floor. He's a solid on-ball defender. Don't lose that. He's just smaller than these other guys. He's a little less physical than Ant. He's a little less physical than Jaden McDaniels even. But the off-ball defense being above average and the on-ball defense being solid, probably also above average, means you're just adding another strong perimeter defender, another strong point of attack defender to everything the Wolves are trying to do. And I don't want to lose that in this whole thing. They didn't need another fantastic, pin your ears back, go at him, on-ball defender, but they got somebody who's still above average and is awesome off the ball. I think he'll be better off the ball. Like we could go on down the list, like Ant off the ball is spotty. He jumps passing lanes really well, but we've also seen that hurt, right? We've also seen Ant hurt the Timberwolves by attempting to jump passing lanes and not being, all the way locked in to do that, or not choosing the right moments in which to do it. But passing lane defense, off-ball defense, all that stuff for Donte DiVincenzo is super impressive. Ants, by the way, I just pulled it up real quick. He was 31st percentile in passing lane defense. DiVincenzo 62nd percentile. Ant was 83rd percentile, steals per 75 possessions, and DiVincenzo was Ant's 83rd. DiVincenzo was 93rd percentile. Deflections per 75 possessions. Ant was 53rd percentile. Donte DiVincenzo's 94th percentile. Okay. Ant, again, good on the ball. There's no question he was good on the ball. Donte DiVincenzo is significantly better off the ball. So what do? It's either Ant or Jaden on the ball, DiVincenzo and Nickeil Alexander-Walker off the ball, and occasionally Nas on the ball. That's a really nice quartet on your perimeter. And that doesn't even factor it. Like Mike Conley's not what he was, obviously, as a point of attack defender, but he's still active, smart, intelligent, very good team defender. And you still have Rudy Gobert roaming that back line. That's huge. Like what Donte is able to bring in that regard is massive. And then I already mentioned the shooting. There's not a whole lot else to say there. I think what the stat I mentioned earlier is really the focal point here, or should be the focal point, is just like the volume and the accuracy of him as a three-point shooter is just phenomenal. Catch and shoot threes, 40.5% last year, 79th percentile. Corner threes, 87th percentile, 49% from the corners. Pull up three-pointers, 86th percentile, just under 42%. Like, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you dice it, Donte DiVincenzo is an elite shooter, and you always need more shooting. So, yeah, you trade Karl-Anthony Towns, you're bringing back, like, DiVincenzo's the one that's going to help with that spacing. He may not fix it because he plays a different position, and you're still going to have to play Randle with Gobert for a chunk of time, and we'll get into the Nas stuff. I haven't mentioned that. We're not going to have time today to focus on the Nas, Randle, Gobert. What's that dynamic? What's that rotation look like? I may just do the show on Wednesday, talk about the big man rotation. I also want to talk about like the differences in the Rudy, Nas, no Cat lineups versus the Rudy, Cat, no Nas lineups. That's another topic. There's so much to get to here. But DiVincenzo is going to help backfill some of that shooting that would otherwise be missing. Related, I want to next get into the depth and how this impacts the Timberwolves' depth in a positive way. We'll do that next. That's how we'll close out the show here today. All right. Timberwolves' depth after this trade is better. It is. Even if I think the overall roster got a little bit worse, and I worry about the offense and the spacing and how it's going to work with Randle and Ant together, which is all true, the depth is better. Here's why. Your starting lineup is a little worse because you're replacing Cat with Randle. I, again, worry about the spacing. We'll talk more about this, but Conley, Ant, Jaden, Randle, Rudy. You're still plugging in an all-star. You're still plugging in a guy that's made All-NBA. And so it's still a strong starting lineup. You're still talking about a starting lineup that's got, if you include Conley, 4 guys that have been all-stars, right? Your bench unit, you go from having really only 2 proven NBA players in their prime, and Nas, Reid, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, to now you have 3. You add in Donte DiVincenzo. And if you still think Joe Ingles can give you 42% from outside the arc and distribute a little bit, initiate some offense, be a big body defensively, and then the ceiling of Rob Dillingham, well, there are some questions about certainly Dillingham's defense, his size, how he'll handle the physicality of the NBA game. All fair. But what's the best case scenario? Or what's the most likely case scenario? Let's do that. What's the most likely case scenario for Rob Dillingham, DiVincenzo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Joe Ingles, and Nas Reid? Well, I don't think Nas Reid is going to be worse this year. I don't think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to be worse in a contract year. Those guys are going to be solid. We know what Donte DiVincenzo is. He's going to be motivated. So what's the most likely case for Joe Ingles? I don't know, probably what he did last year in Orlando, which was spotty, but like when he's on the floor, he's going to knock down threes. He's going to do what Slow-Mo did offensively for Minnesota in terms of being a bit of an offensive Swiss Army knife, initiate and pick and roll, help you when you're in a zone or when the opponent's in a zone defense. Like he's not going to be like offensively, he's going to be fine. Rob Dillingham, what's the most likely scenario? I think he'll really struggle defensively. I think he'll be a really good catch and shoot 3-point shooter, and he'll have moments offensively where it's like, can we play this guy because he's 160 pounds and he's getting knocked to the floor and jacking up tough shots? There's going to be moments where he's lights out. And this dude is like, Lou Williams or Jamal Crawford, or, knocking down these tough crossing guys up, knocking down tough fadeaway jumpers, catch and shoot threes, running the break. But now your fallback is you can run Ant and DiVincenzo together in the backcourt. You could have one of those guys on the floor, and Julius Randle's the one that's going to, dribble the ball on the court, throw it to Julius, and he's going to do a few jab steps and make a move, and pretty good in isolation. It's not what you want to do all the time, but if you need to. And that doesn't. And then your next line of guys is Terrence Shannon Jr. Like, at this point, TJ Shannon's probably your 11th guy. And he was 9 months ago, he was probably going to win player of the year in college. Like, this dude can score. He's going to wreak havoc defensively. He's going to get out and transition and dunk on guys. And he's a volume distance 3-point shooter. To have him as your 11th guy with a ton of upside is great. And Chris Finch that's the one thing that came out of media day on Monday. I think that's significant is the praises that are being sung of Josh Minott by everybody, but especially Chris Finch. And I've been saying for a couple of years, Josh Minott's the do stuff guy that this team's missing. He may take the Joe Ingles role, by the way. If he can shoot threes at league average, Josh Minott could end up being your essentially your 4 off the bench if Nas is your 5. And then you've still got Leonard Miller, whatever he becomes, which he may still be a year away. I think he sees a lot more G League time again, although I don't know how valuable it is for a third straight year to spend significant time in the G League. And that doesn't even include that's it. Like, that's only 13 guys I just mentioned. But there's a lot to like there. This team is deeper now. It's got a solid top 8, which doesn't even include Joe Ingles and Rob Dillingham or Terrence Shannon. The depth of this team is unquestionably better than it was prior to this trade, even if the ceiling of this roster this year is a little bit lower. And who knows with Randle's contract what this looks like 12 months from now, because Dillingham could obviously turn out to be fantastic and a true Conley replacement. I mean, TJ Shannon could end up being a 6th man of the year in a couple of years. Like, it's all reasonable. Like, all that stuff is on the table. But this year, they now don't have to rely on those rookies as much because of DiVincenzo. And one of the things I want to get into later this week is something I alluded to earlier, which is the idea of Julius Randle basically running the bench unit, staggering Ant and Julius Randle. And then in crunch time, depending on who the opponent is, even if Randle's starting these games, and I think he will, I'd be shocked if he didn't, Nas could be closing. If they need offense to close a game, or they need, if they need offense at all, Nas may be on the floor because he's just a more synergistic fit with Ant than Julius Randle is. If they need a little bit more switchability or physicality, maybe it's Julius Randle. Or maybe it's Julius Randle spelling Anthony Edwards in the middle of the fourth quarter. Julius runs the offense while Ant's on the bench. Nas is on the floor with both groups, and Nas ends up playing 35 minutes because, not every night, but on for certain games, because they need offense throughout the fourth, and Julius Randle can spell Ant and run the offense for stretches. Like, there are more options here. That's the other thing. There's a little bit more flexibility with this depth than there might have been with Karl-Anthony Towns, based on what we saw out of Cat the last couple years without Ant on the floor, because it was just less smooth than it was, say, 5 years ago for Karl-Anthony Towns. Not because he's a worse player, but because his role had shifted and he wasn't necessarily getting those opportunities as frequently in the last couple of years. So there are definite positives to this trade. There are things that could be and should be better. Again, Julius Randle putting pressure on the rim, drawing fouls, distributing it a little bit. His assist rate, corner shooting could be an opportunity for upside. Donte DiVincenzo as a shooter, Donte DiVincenzo as an off-ball defender, and the overall depth of this team has improved after the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. So the rest of this week, what I want to get into is, as I mentioned earlier, we'll do a show on Julius Randle at some point, focusing on what he can do with the ball in his hands as a distributor, punishing mismatches, getting to the free throw line, dig into that a bit more. Related, how do we compare the Mitchell Robinson, Julius Randle minutes with the Knicks to the Cat Rudy Gobert minutes with Minnesota? And then also, what about the no Cat minutes? Like, what about the Rudy and Nas pairing with the Timberwolves over the last couple of years? What could that tell us about what Chris Finch does with his rotation between these three bigs now, Rudy, Nas, and Julius Randle? And then those are kind of the big ones that I want to get to. And then we'll also I want to talk about some of my major concerns, which is related to the Rudy Nas lineups. I think there might be I don't know what the right term is. It's not a grass is greener situation because Nas was already on the team, but the numbers don't always back up what we think about some of the Nas Reid lineup. So I want to get into that a bit more as well here in the next few days. So much to get to. And that's why we're daily. Of course, training camp starts Tuesday. So today. So we'll also update on any sort of news that comes out of training camp, anything significant that should get covered. We'll talk about here on the show as well. And of course, the preseason opener, I don't believe it or not, it's this Friday night, the 4th. So we'll also talk about that, of course. And we'll cover that on Monday's show as well. So lots to get to here this week. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK. Of course, for your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA show where the local experts keep you updated daily on all the biggest storylines ahead of the season. I was on Locked On NBA on Monday's show, so go check that out. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast. We'll catch you next time.